Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Starting Small. Today, I'm joined by Rachel Krupa. Rachel, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Cameron. I'm very excited to chat with you.
Yeah, so to kick things off, I'd like to start out with your upbringing. Where did you grow up, and what would you say your childhood was like?
I think I had a great childhood. I grew up in a small town in Michigan. It was called Pinconning, which is like a population of, I think, less than 12,000.
Hmm,
Or not 12,000, 1,200. It was super tiny, one stoplight.
wow.
And it was incredible. I think that's where kind of just like the joys of convenience stores kind of happened
Yeah,
because we shopped, our grocery shopping was more at gas stations because that's where you got your milk, egg, your cheese because it was the closest thing to us because it was
yeah.
a very rural farming city.
Amazing. So growing up, what were some of your interests or aspirations at a young age, pre-college? So what were you interested in?
I was very much an athlete, gymnastics, cheerleading, then student council, and kind of just like always like having more of like a mission to things,
Yeah.
and that early learning of asking the questions of why, and I think building that energy from like the cheerleading gymnastics side of it is like that
Mm,
overly performing, and also at the same time of leading a crowd.
yeah,
But then the student government side of it was very much of like how do we do things right and how do we make things better for collective good.
for sure. I love it. So going on to, I saw you went on to Central Michigan. Did gymnastics or athletics go into that as well, or what did that look like?
Cheer Cheerleading, yeah. So I
Okay.
was collegiate cheerleader throughout college as well.
Awesome. So, what did you end up studying there, Central Michigan, and kind of what did you get interested in doing after that?
Yeah, I went to school initially to start to do meteorology. I
Okay.
wanted to be more of a better way to say a weather girl. But
Yeah.
then at the same time, it was like understanding that meteorology is like basically having a master's or not a master's, but like a degree in math.
Yeah.
And I'm not the best with like mathematics. So that was just like a big check of no.
Yeah.
And then it was broadcasting of like, oh, I feel like being a news anchor would be incredible and fun. And then I can't read a teleprompter. Like words across like a screen, I just can't do. It was something you learn early in life that you're like, yeah, I can't do this either.
Yeah.
And so had a really great degree, kind of within like Central Michigan. It was like the first year, I think my sophomore years, they started doing integrated public relations because of the
Mm,
broadcasting side that I started going through for 2 years. It was like PR is journalism, it's broadcast, and it's
yeah.
communications, which then that turned into okay, I think PR is like the angle, but I also started doing political science too. So
Okay.
then I also have a degree in poli sci and then public relations. And so it was more of doing tons of internships to
Mm,
understand what I actually wanted to do
yeah.
before doing it.
Amazing. So, before we get into your own agency that you started right out of college, what kind of PR did you get into? Was it products, direct to consumer? What kind of range did that cover?
Yes, so initially I started with internships with a congressional member in DC. So it was a very much a political, then realizing I don't like the policy side of it. And, in the early 2000s, like being a female in more of a corporate setting,
Yeah.
you had to wear nylons and you had to be very like, it was very weird in regards of like dress code restrictions,
Yeah.
and you're like, I don't want to wear nylons the rest of my life. It's those like small things make a big difference in just like overall like thought process.
For
So
sure.
I did a handful of different degree or internships in poli sci, and I was like, I don't want to do that check from a PR perspective.
Mm,
Then I moved to New York to do Major League Baseball, but instead of doing comms internship, I decided to do an IT internship with Major League Baseball, the commissioner's office.
mm.
And because I was like, I need to diversify my background and do IT. Basically, it was like a year and a half, or maybe a half a year, 6 months, eight
Mhm.
months. That was very much of like testing a Price Waterhouse clearing kind of like, system that they were going to implement, but at the
Yeah.
end they didn't implement it. And so it was like,
Mm,
okay, that's the 8 months of my life that I was testing a system that I didn't really learn
wow.
anything, but that was, I think, the best internship I had because the incredible connections and humans that I met there
Yeah.
um, are individuals and people that I'm still in connections with, but
Mm,
ended up being like, higher up within baseball, higher up within like different like sporting organizations.
mm,
And so that's where I got like that inkling of like, okay, connections are everything.
yeah.
And they make a big difference, and that's kind of what PR is.
Yeah.
And I was coat checking at the Hudson Hotel because in New York you have to work multiple jobs, and or at least I did.
Yeah.
And I was doing coat check at the Hudson, and a person came up and was just like, "Hey, if I get you an internship in PR, will you go on a date with me?" And I was like, like,
Oh my
oh,
gosh.
so icky. And I ended up getting an internship at Lizzie Grubman, which is like a really great entertainment PR agency. And that
Mm,
was in 2002. And ended up getting an internship there. And that's more of the catalyst of starting more of the entertainment, hospitality
mm,
side of PR, which then I've now had within my own agency and company. But that was more
mm.
of the first real job that I
Wow.
had in PR. Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting. I'm curious, how long did you hold this job? I know it's an internship, or did you work somewhere else prior to your own agency? And how long?
Yeah, so I was with Lindsay Grubman for 5 years.
Okay.
And that was doing a lot of nightclubs and more celebrity driven events from like entourage premiere parties to, nightclub openings in the Hamptons. And
Yeah.
then I moved to LA after working for her for 5 years to open up a West Coast office for another communication company where we did a lot more restaurants and
Mm,
more spirit companies. And so I was with that agency for, I think, 3 years
mm.
um, before then starting my own company. So I was out of agencies for probably 8 years
Okay.
before then doing my own thing.
Got it. So, I mean, you've covered such a wide variety of industries. I'm curious, starting your own with Krupa Consulting, then what ignited that interest to start your own? You leveraged some connections, I'm sure, along the way. And what did that look like?
It was more of it's Krupa Consulting because it was a means to find an end. It
Mm,
was never a dream to have my own agency.
yeah.
I think where I grew up, it wasn't more of, own companies, start like a business. It was more of like, how do you do something that you love on an everyday basis was more of like my outlook of work is like,
Mm,
if you love what you do every day, you should do that and make money doing that. Otherwise you can go back and have like, find a job in some way,
yeah.
in regards of finding income. But then it was more like, okay, like I'm going to do this consulting thing because like I have relationships and I can do work for this restaurant on the side, or I can do this
Mm,
because I wasn't happy at the agency that I was working for. And so it was like, I'll start this,
yeah.
and just like as like a means to find the next step in my PR career.
Got it.
And then it kind of spiraled. It was just like, okay, here's one client, and then this client referred this client, and then this
Mm,
client referred this client. And then at some
wow.
point I was like, oh gosh, like, is this an agency? And it kind of happened.
Yeah. Very cool. I'm curious. I've worked with some boutique agencies where it's actually just like one individual. It's the founder who starts it. Um,
Mhm.
how long were you working here until you brought in your first hire, and how critical was that next hire for the growth?
Yeah, it was myself, and then early on, it was just more of like internship and assistant,
Yeah.
because like it was more of hospitality and a lot of restaurant work that you need just like bandwidth and like human power of just like doing events and openings. And
Yeah.
so I had an assistant early on, to kind of help with just like busy work, list building, X, Y, and Z. And I
Mhm.
would say probably after a good 2 years is like when we made more of like a first hire.
Yeah.
And then we were pretty much of a core team of like four people
Mhm.
for, I would say, 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
And then at that point, it was like, okay, we have a lot more business, we should grow. And it's that
Mhm.
exponential growth where you're like, here's four, and then you're like, here's eight.
Yeah.
And then now we're at like 15. And,
Wow.
it's just like, I like small and intimate.
Yeah.
And so I think we're at like a really good sweet spot right now.
Mm, I love it. So, in what ways would you say that you expanded industry wise? You said you focused on hospitality. What does Krupa kind of focus on today, industry wise?
Yeah, and I think that's where we kind of learned. Hospitality was where our backbone was. I did nightclub PR for 8 years, So
Yeah.
what do you do after nightclubs? You're like, people open up restaurants.
Yeah.
They have liquor brands. And then as I think I grew up with like a really cool group of like people that were nightclub promoters that were, very much more of the entrepreneurial spirit that
Yeah.
now owned restaurants. So it was more of less like they were promoters at this club. Now they have restaurants and I can do PR for it. And
Mm,
we talk about cocktails, which is similar to nightclub.
yep.
And then it turned into more of like CPG and
Mm,
then wellness, because being an athlete and being more within like the, wellness community my entire life, from the personal
yeah.
kind of passion, it was more of like, hey, like let's start talking about this, because that was 2000, I would say, 2012,
Mm,
2013, where you started having this shift of CPG that was better for you.
yep.
And that was where you had like the small organic section within a grocery store, and you're like, here's organic. And it was before like Whole Foods with Whole Foods.
Yeah.
And then you had the explosion of Whole Foods. And then it was more of like, hey, what about the quality of ingredients that are going inside your products? And then there was like the shift.
Mm,
And so we were very fortunate to be on that better for you restaurant side of just like looking at it in the sense of like, where are you sourcing your ingredients? What are the type of proteins that you're doing?
yep.
Looking at equality, and then the CPG side of it was like, okay, we got this.
Mm,
And then people started coming to us, where one of our first like wellness clients was Designer Whey, which was like the first female focused, protein powder. And
wow.
that was like early 20, probably 2010,
Wow.
2012. And then we started talking about adaptogens and superfoods
Mm,
probably early on back then too. And then we became known as like the food and wellness kind of agency.
wow. Incredible. I think this, yeah, it's a perfect segue into the Goods Mart 2018 launch. And I would love to hear your POV on this, but what I'm gathering is you kind of went into CPG and that's what inspired the Good Mart launch. Did you take some of your clients, existing clients from PR, into as like some of your first products?
We had some of them, but I think it was more of this, it was multiple iterations before. So it was like something I was toying with for a long time. And
Yeah.
I'm a believer, if you talk about something long enough with like people, you're like, I'm gonna open up a better version of a 7-Eleven. And
Yeah.
everyone's like, okay, great. And then if you're talking about it for a year, you either do it or
Yeah.
you stop talking about it.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, can I actually do this? And there was no business plan in place. There was no thought process of how do I do this?
Mm,
It was um, being very fortunate to have had a PR agency then for 8 years of, okay, I know people that have a contractor. I know I need to find a venue. I know I have people because we launched Thrive Market, and a lot of friends like knew that
mm,
operational side that connected me to, the human that consulted on the operations side of like, here's how you set it up.
yeah.
And so it was like, okay, let's do this, because for me, it was like there's a better for you product that exists in pretty much every category
Yeah.
back then. And that was, say, 2017, 2016. But why didn't convenience stores carry the things that we wanted? And if it was supposed to be convenient,
Mm,
why wasn't convenience matching to what our needs and wants were?
yeah. Very cool. I'm curious then. So what were some of those first product lines before launching? You said you were toying with it. I'm sure you had to have some base of SKUs to be able to then start selling. What was that focus at first?
Yeah, I think everything in our company, or everything in like the goods initially, I worked with an incredible like registered dietitian, Ashley Koff, to
Mm,
help me figure out what those brand pillars were. So that
yeah.
was like non-GMO, no artificial flavors, like, minimally processed in regards of just like proteins, non-antibiotic from like a protein perspective, and just like having our base level of like what better for you meant.
Yep.
Because better for you and healthy, I guess healthy to others, is such a wide spectrum. But
Yeah.
if we say better for you because of X, Y, and Z, you can reach more people and be more approachable.
Mm,
So early brands were, it was Siete was just launching. It
mm,
was, Jackson, Terra chips and like Jackson's One or Jackson's Own. It felt like it feels like forever ago
yeah.
that you had. It was back then. It was like Partake, and Denise, who started Partake, was just launching.
Wow.
Olipop was just launching.
Mm,
Then you had, Mountain Valley Water that was becoming more of like the it water, Just Water was just launching at the same time.
yep.
And so you had these really cool brands that were doing it right. That was Mary's Gone,
Mm,
Mary's Gone, blanking on all the names back in the day, but now they're namesake names. And
Yep.
so that back then you're like, okay, this is amazing because this is like the brands that now you see are doing it in infiltrated basically every grocery store
Mm.
because they're the ones that were the pioneers.
Yep.
And so you're like, yeah, that's great. But you've also saw a lot of brands that are not with us anymore.
Mm. For sure. So to the listeners out there, can you, at launch especially, did you launch with the brick and mortar, or did you launch online, minimal products? What did that launch look like initially?
We launched with a brick and mortar store, and
Wow.
it was a brick and mortar store without really understanding what it was, but we knew kind of like, okay, I can figure it out.
Yeah.
So it was a brick and mortar store in Los Angeles. It was around 800 square feet. We
Mm.
had over, I think, 300, 400 SKUs. We had a coffee bar, self-serve coffee bar, because we pay homage to like gas stations where it's self-serve.
Yeah.
We had organic kombucha slushies at launch. We had a lot of like ugly fruits and vegetables because that was like right when
Mm.
like the upcycled ugly fruits and vegetables kind of like came to the limelight. So we worked
Yeah.
with local farmers to have ugly fruits and vegetables that were at a better price. Because
Mm.
for us, it was really trying our best to be approachable versus alienating in the sense of just like having a store that everything was like, better
Yeah.
for you.
For
For some
sure.
people, that means like not tasty. It means that it's too expensive. It's X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
So it was really, really interesting to open up in Silver Lake, where it was a really great diversity of humans
Mm.
that came to us for different needs.
Yep.
And it was fun.
Yeah.
Still is.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, you said you had a brick and mortar. So what happened? Was COVID an impact on that as well? And then what did that shift look like? I know you have New York spot now,
Mhm.
but what did that first store um and pan out to be?
Yeah, so that was April of 2018. In
Yep.
October of 2018, I opened up New York. And so that was just like, you put your competitiveness on overdrive, where you're like, okay, yeah, I can scale. I can open up something fast.
Yeah.
So it was not really understanding the business and not really understanding like retail, because retail is a beautiful art of
Hmm.
location. It's foot traffic. It's like actually understanding like the usage of your customers, of like how often are they going to come in? What are they going to come in for?
Yep.
And so I was looking at it as more of like, yeah, I can open up multiple stores.
Mm.
And so it was having two companies. So I still had the PR agency, still have it. It
Yep.
was, having the PR agency on New York and LA,
Mm.
having a store in New York and LA, and then me being a sole owner of both.
Yeah.
And so collectively, it was just like, I don't know where I'm living. I don't know where I'm at. I'm just juggling two businesses, trying to do my best as like being a leader, being, a business owner. And it was more of making a hard decision of being like,
Yeah.
people in New York know how to shop small. They know how to shop convenience.
Mhm.
And so it was right before COVID that decided just to close the Silver Lake location because it didn't have the foot traffic. But
Yeah,
that's something you learn over time. And like, it's like I have a master's in business now.
for sure.
But it was hard. It was one of the biggest things as an entrepreneur. You're like, I'm a failure
Mm.
because I closed my store.
Mm.
You felt like you disappointed the community, you disappointed the brands, you disappointed your team, you
Mm.
disappointed all of this. And you were just like, I'm a complete failure right now.
Mm. No, I see what you're saying is when I lived in LA, I totally get it. The foot traffic, I was in Santa Monica, so it was minimal. And I was in New York a couple weeks ago, in Soho. I should have stopped by, but the foot
Yeah.
traffic is just drastically different, and just the mindset of the people who commute and live around there, it is a difference for those who don't live there. So I totally get what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
But
So it was great. But it was like you need to trial and error at things. We also had a third lease signed to open up before the end of 2018.
yeah.
And so it was just like I bit off too much that I could chew. And
Mm.
like, it was just more of making sure like it was intentionally to do what we did. And like
Mm.
e-commerce didn't come until the pandemic. And that
Yeah.
was more of a pandemic. Our customers wanted the products and we didn't have a way to get it to them. And so I was like, okay, let's turn on Weebly and I'll build
Yeah.
out the site myself.
Yeah. So majority of our guests are CPG founders, and a lot of our listeners are as well. I'm curious to them, what does the process look like then? So a new product wants to roll into the Goods Mart. What does that process look like, and kind of picking for you guys?
Yeah, for us, it's we really want to be that place that all emerging brands are going into because we want to be like a really true retail partner with them
Mm,
in regards of helping them. It's like, what do you need help with? And that's like the biggest question is like, once you're in our store, we look at it from like a standpoint of price point. We make sure that we have good margins because you need margins in order to run a business.
yeah.
But then what is the foundational story? What is like the mission? And then also what is the taste? Because for us, like customers come in to understand that so taste is subjective, obviously,
Mm,
but like when something tastes great, you're like, I know I'm not a monk fruit stevia person, but I know like if there is like a product that is like really great blended, like I know this is going to be great for them,
mm,
or here's this. And so we really look at it as collectively, not only myself, but our team tastes the product.
yeah.
And like my dad, that's not a healthy human. He's healthier now, so I won't say that. He's working on it really hard, but he grew up on Doritos and like potato chips in
Yeah.
Michigan, and so it's like, do you like this, Dad? And he's just like, I love this product, and I'm like, okay, great. If you love this, it's like you can find something for everyone. Um, and then it's just like really looking to be like, how do we be help? How can we be helpful?
Mm,
Like majority are young, so it's do you need help with distribution? Do
yeah.
you need like help with just figuring out what is a great price point?
Mm,
Do you want connections with other founders? Do you maybe need help with investment? Do you need help with just like pinging ideas off from marketing and brand? Because that's something that I've been doing for 20 years.
yeah.
So we want you to start with us, but we want you to graduate from us.
Mm,
And we want you to be in, the Whole Foods, the Sprouts, the Krogers of the world. But let us like get your feet wet a little bit
yeah.
into like the brick and mortar space and like the retail space and like let us like make sure that you're ready to go. So when you're ready to get to the bigger players, you kind of have a good foundation.
Mm, I love that. Well, I like to conclude each episode with this. If you can share one piece of advice with an aspiring entrepreneur, maybe something you've learned or regret along the way, what would you say that would be?
There's two.
Mhm.
There's never a right time to launch.
Mm,
So like there's never the perfect moment. You just
yeah.
got to do it and then go. And that if you look at every, say, mess up as a learning, you're never really failing
Mm,
because you look at it as like, hey, this didn't work, but what did I learn from this?
mm,
Then you're constantly on that positive, like I'm growing and expanding and developing skill sets that you're not in this Henderson way of like, oh my gosh, I'm a failure. I closed my store. I did this, I did that. But it was like, you know what I learned from that? I learned that real like foot traffic is everything. I learned that you
mm,
need like parking if you're in LA. Like I learned that you need to have like, breakfast, lunch, dinner traffic and like you need to have like a point system for that. Like
yeah.
I learned like marketing is key, community and connecting with things are key for us.
Mm,
And so then you're never really failing. And isn't that a beautiful way to look at things of like, I'm not failing, but I'm growing with every single moment that you have?
mm, yeah. Amazing. Well, Rachel, thank you
Like
so
and
much.
that.
Yeah, no, that was a good end. But Rachel, no, thank you so much for joining me. And to the listeners out there, make sure to check out the Goods Mart at thegoodsmart.com.